As far as production goes, when you're ready to go, um, I often just like to get sounds in as early as possible, and it would really be a smart idea for you to make sure you have placeholders in your game. Now, it's not just for the industry. This is for like your own projects. You're working on your MQP, for example, and you're working on your dream game project with your classmates, your peers, and they're talking about sound, and they say, "Well, we'll get to it in D term," and that's what always happens in like the last 2 weeks of D term. The sound's going, so you want to avoid that. And what we can do is compel your programmer to add placeholders, or what we call first pass sounds, just for position, just for proof of concepts. All right, it's really important because even if you're totally wrong about the implementation, and does not work at all in the game, let's just get rid of it. At least you can audition it. It also means that you're creating a framework, some code or code base, or just some sort of progression, if it's blueprints in Unreal or something, so that you've got a medium, like a conduit for your sounds to travel through. If you wait until the last minute, you'll find that you won't even have time to implement the simplest of sounds because there's just no time. Even if it's visual programming, it's just going to be really difficult to be troubleshooting sounds that way. So it's good to have the placeholders in early. Then all you have to do is swap out the sound file. The implementation is already there, or at least it's near there. All right, so this is a huge deal, getting the placeholders in. I can't stress it enough. It's super important. All right. Another thing is to leave room for the unexpected. You probably say, well, how will I know how to leave room for the unexpected if I don't know what to expect? What I mean by this is just that it's always good to leave some padding in your schedule. So if you know you're going to be working 40 hours a week on sound and only sound, you may want to think, well, how could I do it in 30 hours? Because that extra 10 hours, something always comes up. It could be like a trade show event, or like, a media blitz or something. If you're working for a larger company, it may be that you're pulled off the project for some reason and you need to work on another title. Again, could happen in a large company where you're kind of sharing resources between different studios, right? So you should always leave room for the unexpected. Or you may find that there's a new feature that comes in with design, and suddenly they need a new set of sounds that you hadn't anticipated, and you've just got to do it, right? It's part of the game. It's great. You're excited to do it, but you've got to leave room for the unexpected. Okay, and also think about thinning out everything you have. If you worked for a magazine, online magazine or something, newspaper, whatever, there'll be articles you'll see that are written, and they're pretty tightly put together in terms of it's like a good read. That often is the sign of good editing. And as a rule of thumb, maybe the editor said, you need to get rid of, I'm kind of making this up, right? You need to get rid of 15% of the copy. And so it gets trimmed out. But what decisions do you make to get rid of what sections? And that's a bit of an art. It takes practice. And so that is also the same application here in sound, that you want to think about the ones you can remove from each set. Maybe if you're working on this dream game of, the Elder Scrolls Part 6 or something, you could say, well, I don't need all these footstep sounds for different surfaces. I'll just use generic footstep sounds, or I only need, X amount of spell casting sounds. It really depends on the game, but again, it's just something that takes practice. And remember, your schedule could change anytime you pulled off the project, or you may need to just, add sounds for a feature right away that you didn't anticipate. Okay. You also may expect, and you can expect this, that the sounds that you thought were going to work so well, as they propagate through a 3D space, they just don't sound that great. It could be that you need to add some processing to it, some effects, but more likely you just may need to just start over with your sound design and maybe retool, from the ground up. It's quite possible. And above all, this is your second dysfunctional family, but a family nevertheless. And dark humor prevails. You want to keep an open mind and be fair with everybody, and you're going to be spending a lot of time with these people, right? This again, your second family, and you really want to just make sure that you can all work together, have good chemistry, and so forth. And this will all be tested during the production phase. So, and post-production. So as far as sound design goes for production, there are all kinds of tools and techniques. All right, let's just go through some of them. In the production cycle, we're talking about sound recording. If you're doing it from scratch, you don't have any off-the-shelf sounds, you're in total creative control, which is totally awesome and totally dangerous, because you want to make sure that you have enough experience that it won't fall flat. Like if things go wrong, wow, these Foley sounds are so difficult. This isn't working out. You'll have to go to the off-the-shelf source material and work from there, right? You just have to kind of plan for that. So total creative control is great, but it can be a bit scary too. And here's something. When you're recording sound, not everything has to be recorded like 1 inch from the microphone. I think a lot of people starting out in sound design, creating their own sound effects, feel like, well, I want to capture, all the details and every nuances, so I'm going to get right up to the mic. But you'll find that if you do that, you're going to get exaggerated characteristics. This is due to something called the proximity effect. As you get closer to the microphone, sounds that are they're coming out very quietly. Like say you're working with a little mechanical object, like I don't know, you're like a mechanical watch, and you're turning the little knob to wind the watch. You're getting these exaggerated characteristics, so you wouldn't just hear the little knob turning, but you may hear like these little gears inside turning, depending on how, if it's an old-fashioned pocket watch or something. And that's great for exaggerated characteristics, but you can move stuff back from the mic, and it'll have a different quality to it. Okay, so close-up sounds are great for like any kind of human elements, like footsteps, weapon usage, body falls, all that type of stuff. But you may want to have sound recorded from what we call like a medium perspective, which is kind of vague, right? I apologize, but it's anything in the player's vicinity. So maybe there's like a cow mooing in the middle of the room or something, and you don't necessarily have it as a point source in the game. It's just a sound playing, just flat, like maybe it's stereo or something. It could be a point source, but regardless, you want to have it playing back to the listener so that it feels like it's kind of a few feet away, or more than a few inches away, but not out out a mile away or something like that. Just in a medium vicinity, or what you call a larger vicinity. And then, of course, your distance sounds are going to be like your ambience and things like that. But really, the two that can really make a difference are the medium and the close perspective. Okay, so that's something you can think about when you start to record your own custom library. Now, another mistake that happens in the production cycle is that we waste unnecessary amounts of time recording too many sounds of the same sound, I should say. So, if you have the sound of a duck quacking, you're like, great, I just got the sound of a duck quacking. You don't really need to hang out all day with the duck, have lunch with the duck and dinner. A few quacks, you got it, right? And you can move on to verify your recording, make sure you actually recorded it, and then move on to your next, sound target for the day. A few takes is enough. Because why we do this is because you don't want to go back when you're in production, and then you're going into post-production and having to make all these edit decisions. It's just too many. You don't need 300 duck quacks. It's like 2 or 3 is good. So it's also going to help you stay organized and stay on schedule, especially if you're dealing with thousands of sound effects, which is not uncommon in some even mid-sized projects. Okay, moving on to samplers. We talked about sampling in lecture 4, where we're just taking snapshots in time that are fixed amounts of time, just like frames on a film. And any digital audio is made of samples, right? But what we can do with, say, a MIDI keyboard is map samples. Like if I had, say I had that duck quacking, and I had like one or two of them, and I took one that I liked, and I map it to the middle key, or like middle C of this keyboard, and then I just pitch shift it down as I go lower and pitch shift it up as I go higher. I'm mapping each quack to a different key and raising and lowering the pitch as needed. And so suddenly I have a duck symphony, and I can just perform in, all this like wacky music. Samplers are great for this sort of thing. Typically, when we want to kind of map sounds like that, we will call it a virtual instrument, which I'll talk about in a minute. If it's not coming up, I'll talk about it in another lecture, I promise. But it's where we map so many tones that we're really creating, all the nuances and articulations of that thing. So it might be like a violin, right? That we have like different bowing techniques, and then you have all the notes up and down for all those techniques, and dynamics control if I'm playing soft, piano, or loud forte or fortissimo, that sort of thing. But as far as sound effects go, we can map to a MIDI keyboard, and you can have multiple samples. You could have, if I had 88 keys on a full-size MIDI keyboard, I could map 88 different sound effects to it. And why you would do this would be if you wanted to, say, have a MIDI performance, you could set up a MIDI file to play in your game. And in a particular room you go into something, you have these timed events. So the MIDI is triggering sounds, samples that you've already got loaded, say, in some fashion, on the loaded into memory or hard drive, what have you, wherever they need to reside, and you can play back a performance in this way. So it's a really interesting use of MIDI, but that is often used in this way. Sequencers. Okay, one of my favorite production tools is sequencers, because yes, sequencers generally are for recording music, but again, they can be used for recording sound effects. And so just like we had a MIDI performance you saw earlier with the sampler here, we could incorporate any sort of digital audio with the sequencer. Okay, so you could have MIDI events and sound effects all together. The MIDI files could be playing music, right? But you could also have any kind of tones, noise, whatever you like, and you have a kind of a multi-track situation here. So that's the difference.